Rachel Ann Goodman, and I'm here with Steve Schnaar, who is running for City Council for the City of Santa Cruz, and we're going to be talking with him about his run for City Council and what he's all about. So, Steve, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. So, obvious question in a job interview. What are the main reasons you're running for this seat, and a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm running because I want to bring positive change to Santa Cruz on issues like affordable housing, environmental sustainability, and positive solutions to homelessness. So a little bit about myself. I've lived in Santa Cruz since 2001. I moved here with my wife, Stacy Falls, who's a high school teacher at Santa Cruz High. And I have done a lot of different community work. I've been a mechanic at the bike church for almost the entire time, almost 15 years. I help people fix bikes. I've also done outdoor ed, and I lead kids on outdoor ed and bike rides and things. I started an organization called the Santa Cruz Fruit Tree Project. And a lot of what we do, we get people together to find fruit in neighborhoods that's going to waste, and we harvest it. Sometimes we pair it with something fun like making apple cider with the apples. We're also planting we have already planted the beginning of an orchard in a city park in collaboration with the Parks Department, which is a first time Santa Cruz has approved anything like that. We'll be expanding it this year. I serve on the steering committee for the Resource Center for Nonviolence. I've worked on a variety of campaigns. Some years ago, I helped to stop methyl iodide, which is a dangerous chemical that was approved as a pesticide from being used in our area, and that would have had a really harmful impact on farm workers and kids that live near the fields. I've done a whole lot of different stuff, and we could spend all day, but I would just refer people to steveforcouncil.com. If they look up my website, there's a whole list of the different kind of things that I've done in the community. And now I'm hoping to serve the community a different way.
A lot of what you're describing is community service oriented, and you work with young people a lot. A lot of young people are kind of looking to the future and wondering what role and what way forward there is for them here, because housing is so expensive. So I want to start there. There's a lot of big issues to talk about in only a short amount of time, but let's talk about housing first. Obviously rents are going up and up, and the investment kind of housing buys are happening from people who can pay cash for houses. So in that environment, with 625 new freshmen at UCSC, what can the city do and the council do as far as policy that might impact that equation?
That's definitely a key question. That's on everybody's mind, is housing. And just a quick anecdote. So I was talking to my wife, who's, again, a high school teacher, and she was telling me that her school district made a number of hires from out of the area, and they had already signed a contract, and they started trying to find housing so they could move and start working here, and some of them changed their mind. They couldn't find housing, or it was too expensive. So it's definitely, and then teachers are not the lowest end workers, so we know there's a lot of people making even less, and so it's definitely a top issue. And could we really solve it as one little city? I don't know if we could entirely solve the housing crisis, but there are steps we could take. And I've been talking to a lot of people in the community, getting different ideas, people that work for the county, people work in community advocacy groups like Affordable Housing Now. I'd started, we need rent control. That sounds like a great idea. And I've been looking into it, and it might be part of the picture, although it's complicated and state laws are very restrictive. And so if we do rent control, it can only be one piece of the solution. And so what I've come to is some amount of growth, and adding more housing is good. And we need to balance that with environmental issues, water usage. We need to balance it with inviting neighborhood input. And I've talked to a lot of neighbors, especially on the east side, who are not very happy with the way things are going. So balancing all that out, some amount, even the neighbors on the east side I've talked to, they're sure we need some more housing, but it should be distributed and throughout the city, and it should be done with the public involved in the planning. So adding more units is good, but what kind of units? I was talking yesterday with Sibley Simon, who has in past years been very involved with 180-2020, putting chronically homeless people into housing that's federally funded. And he started to get more interested, well, how do we create more housing for working class people? And we're mostly building high-end housing, or there's a rule that a small percentage has to be affordable. And we're not really building a lot of housing, according to Sibley, for working class people. So he started a not-for-profit entity to build housing for that purpose. And they ended up they ended up making it actually for profit on the books, because that way they pay property taxes and are the good graces of the cities they're trying to work with. But any excess profit that goes in to build the next one and the next one. And so that's beautiful. And then for other types of housing where it is more higher end, I support that we increase the amount that's required to be affordable. Right now it's 15%. I think it should be 25% or more. In addition, a lot of developers have been allowed to pay a fee in lieu of actually building the housing. And those fees can go in other ways to help support low-income housing, but I think that it's better to just ask them to build it. And then each time a building goes up, we get the housing. It's distributed throughout the neighborhoods, which is better public planning than pulling it all up to have a few big low-income housings all in the same poor neighborhood.
Let's talk about accessory dwelling units first, because you said distributed, and I'm assuming somewhat you mean that we're going to make it easier for people to permit smaller units in their backyards for in-laws and family. Is that one of the solutions you can see?
Yeah,
happening?
definitely. Well, what I was referring to a minute ago, I was thinking of when new, so there's plans the general plan has some amount of increased density and mixed use, which again, in a limited amount, balanced with water usage and balance with neighborhood concerns. I'm in favor of some amount of increased density. But so what I was talking about is there were neighbors who were concerned, well, why is it all on the east side? And it's like the numbers were very lopsided. I don't remember off the top of my head, but why not distribute it throughout the neighborhoods? So, but I also agree with what you're saying, that there is a way to add more housing without any significant new construction or modest amount, which is having more backyard units or accessory dwelling units and inviting more of them to be permitted. Now, in order for that to serve as housing, then we would have to make sure that we were permitting them as housing and not as short-term or vacation rentals. And that's
another issue I wanted to take up with you, because one of the drivers of rent increases is people take a house off the market for a vacation rental, either short like Airbnb or longer term where they're renting it for a week or two. And there's been complaints about party noise, but more importantly, it takes it out of the rental market. So they're reviewing that right now on various levels. What would you do if you were a magic wand king of the council and could say, here's our solution to that problem?
Yeah, and like so many political issues, that is a really complicated one, because on the one hand, I'm sympathetic if someone owns their house. It's like my house, well, I should be able to do with what I want. Yeah, on balance, I feel like housing is not just your house or this house, it's as a whole community. If we're taking units off the market, it skews the whole market, it drives rents up, and we have such a housing crisis. I do think that we should, zoning is not, it's not just you can do with whatever you want. Zoning and planning is a way that we as a society and as a community determine together how we want to move forward. And I think that considering the crisis that we're facing in terms of affordable housing, it is more important that we create units as housing. In fact, there's another side issue which is on that same theme that I think distinguishes me and some of the other progressive candidates from the current city council and a lot of the, some of the other candidates who are endorsed by all the people who support the current city council. So a few years ago, there's a parcel on Broadway that was zoned residentially. It had a church on it, but it was zoned residentially up to apartments. This could have been a somewhat high-density housing development, and the council changed the zoning and made it into a hotel, or permitted that it could become a hotel. The neighbors didn't want it. They cut down a heritage tree. Then the city council offered a $2 million tax break. And so there's just another way. Well, as a community, how are we choosing to use the available space? And I would say, hotels are important. It's really good. It's part of our economy is so much based on tourism, but we don't need to build hotels in residentially zoned parcels. We can build hotels in commercially and where they're supposed to be.
Right. The transient occupancy tax is important for our economy, but you're saying that there's a place for everything to go. Is that what?
Yeah. And in the case of changing zoning in particular, or if something is specifically designated as housing and we need housing, that's not a good choice of where to find a spot for a new hotel.
Right. So moving to another related issue, homelessness, and also just the feeling of quality of life when you're in downtown Santa Cruz. We were walking downtown the other day and noticed how many people just seem to really need medical attention and a place to sleep. Is there something specific, besides some of the things you already mentioned, that you would like to see happen to address the homelessness issue?
Yeah, and so when I think about homelessness, there's two sides. One is compassion for people who are suffering and in need, and the other side, as you're alluding to, is the negative impact that some people experiencing homelessness have on our public spaces and parks and downtown and in neighborhoods. So what I've seen, I've been in Santa Cruz since 2001, a lot of attempts to use law enforcement, add new laws, and idea seems to be that if we create enough restrictions and we can regulate our way out of homelessness, and people will go away or they'll stop coming from elsewhere. But for one, I think some of those assumptions are flawed. I think the data doesn't support the idea that people are coming here from elsewhere any more than any other West Coast cities. But we certainly have we do have a higher per capita homeless population, and what can we do about it? I don't think law enforcement is helping. The Deputy Police Chief, Rick Martinez, has said similar things, that law enforcement is not a solution. City Manager Martine Bernal was quoted in the paper a few weeks ago saying something again, that if we clear out people's camps, then they'll just go sleep somewhere else, and they might come back to that same camp in a week or two. So what can we do if the laws and restrictions, and we can go crazy to the point where Great Morgani, it's a brilliant street performer, he gets chased off of Pacific Avenue, and there are still homeless people there, or unhoused people, I would prefer. So what can we do that would help? And I'm interested in solutions that help the people and help reduce their impacts on public space. So the All-In Plan is a county-wide effort, which the county and all the municipalities have signed on to, which is, I think that's great. It should be regional. It's really a national issue, but it's at least the best we could do here is regionally as a county. One of the main pillars they're advocating for, which I support, is permanent supportive housing. So the most vulnerable, chronically homeless people, there are federal funds available, and find ways to find an apartment and get them in. And then, so if somebody needs health services or mental health or drug treatment, if they're actually in an apartment, there's so much more stability, and then sometimes actually cheaper to have them there than it is on the street. So that's the best thing you could do is put someone in a house, but there's only limited amount of money. So in addition to that, for all the other people who are not able to benefit from that program, I support positive solutions. For example, designated, supervised camping and parking areas. So again, not just in the city, throughout the county. This is basically a low-cost shelter. So we couldn't afford to have brick and mortar shelters for every unhoused person, but there are cheaper models. They're being implemented in other cities. There are ways to do it without having undue burden on neighborhoods and putting them in, out of a major neighborhood area, rotating them every few months. There are models. So that is something that I strongly support, as well as 24-hour bathrooms. It's undignifying to people on the street to not have a bathroom, and it creates unsightly things, and not to mention potentially spreading disease and getting into waterways. And so for all these reasons, again, I think that taking positive solutions that help unhoused people meet their needs helps them, and it helps reduce the negative impacts that some people in the community are concerned about.
Right. So do you think Santa Cruz has an infrastructure problem? I was noticing some crumbling of sidewalks and potholes and things. Is it since the recession that we've really not caught up with those things, or has it always been that way and I just noticed it? Have you thought about what we could build to make the city look sharper and nicer? Mm-hmm. Just looks a little run down sometimes, and I'm wondering if that's infrastructure money or what the problems
I'm not
are.
really sure about the sidewalks. I haven't noticed personally, but I'm a bicyclist most of the time, and there's certain roads that are definitely in disrepair. What to do about it? Budgeting is so complicated. So when I've been talking to some people from the unions, and then I said I'm very sympathetic. So what we were talking about earlier about affordable housing was some of the union folks pointed out to me, well, the flip side of affordable housing is having enough money to pay for the housing. And for example, some of the folks at the SEIU were telling me there are in the sanitation department only a few people actually live in the city, and most of the workers are coming from Watsonville or other places. And so as a council member, I would work to make sure we understand what is a living wage and that we should be paying workers enough to live here. But in those conversations, okay, well, how are we going to pay for that? Where's the money and this thing and that? And one of the things they were suggesting, well, there's certain capital projects which are probably much more expensive than fixing the sidewalks. Like there was this whole study about widening the bridge at Highway 1 over the river, which Caltrans says is not necessary and it's fine for some time. That's a whole nother story, but how to balance all these things, they might require some new income, and I've understood a lot of what I've done as a candidate is talk to current and former elected officials, talk to community leaders, and politics is complicated, and local governments have been squeezed by cuts from the state and federal level, and so it's hard, but there are ways to bring in more money. You mentioned earlier the transit occupancy tax, which is basically the visitor hotel tax, and we're not at the top of the charts for that. A lot of other cities have higher transit occupancy tax, and that might be a way. That's a big part of our economy. The tourists that come here are using our city services, and so that might be a way to bring money in to raise that 1 or 2%. Beyond that, I don't know. We need to get into further details, but
Yeah, I was shocked once when the police chief of Capitola told me that something like 75% of the calls they get were from out-of-town people who were inebriated and crashing their cars and getting DUIs, and I was shocked. I said, well, that's expensive because your entire police department is, spending its time on visitors, and at the same time, the visitors are completely funding the economy in Capitola, a lot of them. I wouldn't say all, but it's heavily visitor-oriented, whereas Santa Cruz economy a little more diverse, which is a segue into talking about economic issues. There are a lot of studies saying more and more people are shopping online, yet our downtown looks like it's thriving, the retail seems healthy. Is there anything policy-wise a city council can do to support small businesses to stay in business? Because that's clearly one of the main drivers of our economy, or under 50 people employed.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I'll just, on a brief aside, it is interesting. So in all these conversations I had trying to understand politics and where does the funding and all these things, a few different politicians, one from way to the strong environmentalist side against growth, and one of them from more center of the road, both had explained to me that sales tax is so important to Santa Cruz. It's so hard to bring money in. That's one of the main ways the city gets money. And the one Costco store we have in Harvey West, I've been told, brings in more sales tax revenue than the entire downtown. And so I would hope, I'm fine, Costco is fine, it's in an industrial area, it's already there anyway, it's not even an issue, but I would hope that we preserve the type of community we have by not inviting a lot of more big box stores. That's not why I brought it up, but just to be realistic that it is complicated, having economic development or what type of development is complicated. But I definitely, one of the things I love about Santa Cruz is all of our small businesses and what policy-wise can we do. One thing is reducing bureaucratic barriers, and I don't have a whole long list of exact suggestions, but just a couple. One, as the manager of a building that's a community center that was run as a nonprofit business, where that's the hub for sustainable living, where the bike church and other organizations are. When we moved from just one part of the building to the rest of it, I was managing the building site, and I was going through all those permits, and even that little thing, it was really it definitely felt like we were not welcome by the city. The city was not welcoming to us. And there were certain, just from the so many steps, but then, for example, we had to put signs, we had to get a permit for the signs, which is good. You shouldn't let anybody just put any sign anywhere and screwing up the skyline. So we went through the whole process, and the signs were approved, and we're like, all right, good, one less thing. And then we go back, oh, wait, there's another one. Now you have to go to the building department and get a permit for how to mount the signs on the building and pay another fee. And I mean, the money wasn't that much, but it's like, really, like you couldn't just have had those be together. And when I've talked to business owners, I hear similar things. A friend of mine actually who used to be a bike mechanic with me, and he and his wife started Lupolo. It's a pub down on Cathcart, I think is the street. And when they expanded, they were very successful. And I ran into him, I was like, how's it going? Your business going well? And he's like, oh my God. And they were ready for their grand opening of their new one, and then some inspection didn't pass because of a drywall. And they said the drywall wasn't good enough, and he talked to multiple contractors that looked at it and said, oh, I don't get it, it looks fine. And so I'm definitely, those type of things, like we should be welcoming and inviting. We need money from the businesses, that's fine, and simplify it, but keep the same amount of revenue. And we need buildings to be safe, but it seems from what I've heard also from knowing people who had small mechanic shops and things outside of the city limits, that it's just, they did it there because the city is very restrictive and difficult to work with. And so
So good segue. You work in the bike industry, transportation. There's a lot of dialogue right now about the rail trail. There's also transportation corridor dialogue. How can we make our town more walking and bike friendly and maybe a little less car oriented?
Well, already I think the city has been doing a lot on that front. So I've been involved in these issues for a long time. For some time I used to be on the steering committee for what's now called Bike Santa Cruz County, then it was People Power. And over the years, there have been a lot of bike lanes added and some special bridges, and now most recently, Bike Santa Cruz County has successfully advocated for some special painting of green. This makes it very visible, like when a bike lane crosses a car lane at an intersection. So all those things are good. Could we do more? Sure. The rail trail, that's something that I've been a proponent of for over a decade, and it's very exciting that we've passed the county should do this to how are we going to implement it question. And every year for about 5 or 6 years, I've helped to lead an event where we take a bunch of high school students from Santa Cruz to Monterey, students from throughout the county, and we meet in Santa Cruz and we ride. It's about 50 miles. And once you get across the county line, then there's this wonderful path, the same type of thing in the rail corridor, and it goes all the way into Monterey. And I know that the vision is that will connect throughout the whole way, and so I think that'll be wonderful. Another thing that I think is really helpful to look at is public transit. And biking is great. Most people are not going to bike more than 2 or 3 miles. So for people who are going further, we need to have not just keep the schedule that we have now. We should be expanding, not contracting our public transit as an alternative to sitting in traffic on highway. Creative ideas like bus on shoulder transit. So this exists in other places where the bus can run a route that goes past all the traffic. It's possibly the train. I at least support the investigating, could a train be part of our transit package? And my suspicion is if they opened it today, it would take a lot of public outreach and changing people's perspective, and climate change is important and we need to shift our ways. And so maybe not now, maybe in 10 years or whenever it is, but that could be part of it. But giving people other options.
Right. In the short amount of time we have left, I want to make sure we get to a couple of other issues, and there's so many more we could talk about, but if we could, in a very short period of time, quickly talk about the water issues, and then maybe wrap up with talking a little bit about the one you mentioned earlier offline, which was policing. So if we can just quick about water in the next 3 minutes, and police investment in law enforcement, how would you approach those two big issues?
So I'm really pleased with the suggestions from the Water Supply Advisory Committee, and I hope they get implemented, one of which recharging the aquifer, partly through more cooperation between different parts of the county. And I have a brother who is actually, this is his expertise. He has got a PhD in environmental science, and specifically with water. And so when all the desal alternatives campaign was happening, and I asked him about it, and I'm convinced that that's the way to go, and I hope we go that way. And another big part of the water equation, which I've heard a lot of people in town saying that we shouldn't give any more water to UCSC, and it seems reasonable, at least for now, to say they've been reducing their water supply every year, and that is one other aspect of balancing our water and staying within our budget so that we don't have to end up feeling pressured into building a desalination plant. Right.
Any final thoughts on how you would work with the council in your first day and weeks of being a councilman, should you be elected? Any kind of thing about, how...
Well, we're skipping the other question, or
well,
waiting?
we are unfortunately almost out of time, and if you want to choose to answer that instead, you can.
Okay.
We're almost out of...
Well, I just would say briefly that I went to last week to a presentation from the County Sheriff's Department about what they call 21st century policing and community policing, and it was... How much time are we talking about?
We just have a minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's really brilliant stuff that they're doing, and I would hope that the city of Santa Cruz could also go that direction and take the lead of the county sheriff.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for being here with us on the program and talking about your issues, and thank you for your time today.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Steve Schnaar.
Tell me